2025 WHRN Abstract Writing Workshop. I'm Associate Professor Melissa Knott. I'm going to be co-presenting with Dr. Shannon Pike, and I would like to acknowledge that some of the content of this presentation has previously been contributed by Georgie Luscombe and David Schmidt. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which the WHRN network is founded, so the Wiradjuri Nation, and also acknowledge that our conference this year will be hosted in Orange on Wiradjuri country on November 3rd and 4th. I'd like to extend my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to anyone who is watching this recording. So in today's workshop, we're going to be focusing on understanding your audience in terms of the conference that you're preparing your abstract for, understanding the 2025 WHRN Abstract Guidelines and the abstract assessment criteria, and then walk you through what the general abstract structures are and the content of each section in an abstract. So first of all, when you're starting to write an abstract for a conference, the first thing to really think about is who is likely to be attending the conference that you're preparing the abstract for. So is it a conference that's primarily directed towards clinicians? And if so, is that a specific discipline or a multidisciplinary or interprofessional conference? Is the workshop attendees, is the conference attendees likely to include researchers and academics? Is it likely to include educators, service providers, or potentially policymakers? And as you're preparing your abstract, start to think about, what are the hot topics that are of greatest relevance to this particular audience, and to really try to align your abstract with the things that are of greatest importance to these different sort of attendee groups. It's also a really good idea to think about aligning your abstract with the conference theme. So this year, the WHRN 2025 Symposium theme is Building Research Networks, Collaborative Approaches to Rural Health Research. So the conference scientific committee is really looking for abstracts that highlight how we do rural health research in collaborative teams, in collaborative units, how we build networks that can really enhance our rural health research, our reach into the Western New South Wales network area. The key streams of the conference include interdisciplinary collaboration, community engagement in research, research funding and resource sharing. What are really good examples of good practice in partnership development to support research, networking strategies and sustainable models for research networks. And so you can prepare an abstract that aligns with one of these key research streams. You can also prepare an abstract that doesn't align with these themes, but might be really unique to something that you've been working on. So just to touch on what the WHRN 2025 guidelines are in terms of submitting your abstract, all abstracts need to be submitted via the Award Force portal. And these will be linked in the submission guidelines document, but I've also provided a copy of it there on the slide for you. Abstracts are open until August the 11th, so you can submit any time up until then. And abstracts are a maximum of 400 words for the WHRN conference. So for our conference this year, you can submit an abstract under any of the following 4 categories. So the general research category is usually for presentations by more experienced researchers or for research that's been completed. The emerging research or emerging researcher category is for less experienced presenters and for early career researchers. So we really would like to encourage people who might not have presented at a conference before to consider submitting an abstract for WHRN and to include that under the emerging researcher category. The emerging research category can also be used if you don't yet have research results to share. And that's often the case given that the conference isn't until November and we're asking people to submit in August, that you might not yet have results to share. So we'll talk a little bit later in the workshop about how you would navigate that space of not yet having results. But you can still submit an abstract and you would put that under the emerging research category. The third category is student research abstracts, and this is for student research projects that are in development or in progress or that have been completed. And we invite abstracts from students across any health-related discipline. First-time student presenters are really encouraged to submit in this category. And finally, we have an open abstract category, and this is really to invite particularly members of the community or community workers, elders, people who are from other health organisations to submit an abstract that doesn't quite fit into any of those other categories. So, for example, it might be related to arts and health or community health projects. In this category, we are happy to accept more creative submissions. So it can be a written abstract, but it could also be an artwork, it could be photography, multimedia, or other types of audio recorded submissions. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Shannon.
Thank you, Mel. So now we are going to work through the individual sections of the abstract and look at some examples. So firstly, moving on to the title. Next slide, please, Mel. So I really try to think about a catchy, descriptive title. You really want that title to clearly but concisely tell your audience what your research is about. You may also see that it is quite common, but you do not need to have your research question to form part of your title. It absolutely can, but it's certainly not a requirement. Another key thing to think about is trying to integrate the conference theme into your title. So thinking about some of those keywords and how they may be able to be embedded. Some other tips include using a colon to break up keywords and methods, or the study design, as can be seen in that example there. So social isolation in older people, enabling community engagement. Also, think about using a subject and a verb to demonstrate a key finding. Community engagement reduces social isolation in older people. So whilst the title is absolutely important in the submission process, also think about yourself as a conference attendee. What they will do is to look through the program and screen the titles to select which presentations they may attend. So it's really key to try and think of a title that really represents what your research is about. Next, we'll move on to the background and the aims. And this really is the briefest part of your abstract, but it's where you can contextualize your research. So you really want to emphasize what are the gaps in the knowledge and how your study contributes to this. So think about what is the problem, why should people care? As I mentioned, what are the gaps? So what do we know and what is unknown? It's really important here to show that the issue is interesting, a problem worth solving, and relevant to the conference and the conference theme. So after you've identified and demonstrated the need and the gap, you then state your aim. So this is where you can demonstrate what your study is doing to address the gap or the problem, and what is the study purpose, but also the scope of your study. So if we move to the next slide, we will have a look at an example from a successfully submitted abstract in 2024. So I'll give you a moment just to read that one through. So now we're going to highlight the first section there. So you can see in yellow, this is where we can show what we know. So the grow your own approach, we know is a well-known strategy, particularly in medicine. The blue is where the author has shown what we don't know. So what the gap is in relation to this research. And then finally pulling it together, the purple highlights then therefore what the study aims to do and places that research in context. Next, we move on to the methods. So the methods section describes what was done or what you intend to do if you've not yet completed your research. It's really important to provide the sufficient detail for the reader to understand clearly what the research approach or techniques were, so how you conducted your research or plan to conduct your research. Key things to include in this section include the type of study, so the research design. A lot of information about your participants is also key. So you want to describe who was or will be recruited to your study, how they were selected, and how they were actually recruited. So how that sampling occurred. Next, you want to describe the setting of your research. So the context, and it's also a good idea to include your study duration. And finally there, it's important to present how you plan to collect your data and also how you're going to analyse that data. So again, we have the methods section from the exemplar abstract. Again, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to skim through. You can see here there's short, succinct sentences, which is really critical in this section. And if we move to the next slide, we can see the highlighted sections. So firstly, there in yellow, the author has clearly presented the design. So it was a mixed method research approach using online surveys and focus groups. Next, the purple highlights the participants and the research setting, again being really specific to who was recruited and involved, so the physiotherapy students and which year of study. And it's presenting also information about the survey, but also about the focus groups. And finally, in blue, clear, succinct details around how the data was to be analysed. The next section is the results, and this is generally the longest section of your abstract. Whilst it seems really important to present everything, it's really not possible within that word count. So this is really key to reflect and identify on the most important findings and focus on those. So this might include presenting the results of the primary outcomes or any significant themes emerging from your analysis. Now, we can't control what our research results are, and you may find that you have got some negative findings. And we would again reflect back on that tip. If these are important findings, then you should absolutely include those in your abstract. It's also a good idea to include numerical information to back up any of your statements, if this is relevant. So for example, by stating 70% of participants reported increased health literacy. Finally, there are requirements for inclusion of statistical data does vary among different conferences. So we would encourage you to check with your organisers, or it's a great idea to read previous abstracts that are often available online. For WHRN, what we would recommend is if your methods do report a particular analysis that will be conducted, then your results should include those statistical results and those details. As Mel mentioned, we do have the section there for research that is not yet conducted. If your research does fall within that category, under your results, what we would encourage you to do is to include what you expect your outcomes to be in general terms. So for example, this might include that you expect there to be changes in health literacy, or that you will report on changes or the frequency of GP visits. An example from the exemplar abstract, reading through. To highlight these sections, you can see that this is a mixed methods approach and there's a lot of findings. The authors have identified that there are several themes that did emerge, they're in the yellow, but then they're bringing it back in to highlight that the most common reasons will now be reported, which is then presented through the remaining text there on the slide. Because this was a qualitative and a quantitative, being a mixed research, it's really important that we've provided the results from multiple perspectives. So in the blue, they're highlighting that the results include the student responses and also the clinical supervisor responses. The purple shows, again, that mixed methods, and you can see here that the statistical analysis is brief, but it's appropriate to this study design. So providing the quantitative, 85%, but also in the top 3 sentences there, the qualitative findings with the themes. So that's the way that they analyse that data. So some of this does overlap, but you can see how the author was able to pull it together and present those key findings. Moving on to the implications and conclusions, it can be quite easy to restate your results, but this is what you want to try and avoid. You really want to think about, so what? What do your findings mean? How can this new knowledge be translated into clinical practice or service delivery? What do they also mean for individual clients and their families, for our communities, health professionals, for educators, for health policy, or for future research? Try and think about the potential impacts of your findings. And also, who needs to take notice of these findings? Are there any practical applications for these findings? And if you can, highlighting what is novel or innovative. This is another point in your abstract where you can also link back to the conference theme. But whilst you're considering your implications, it's really key to think again about who are your audience members, who will be here at the conference, to align your implications to what you believe may be their needs. So looking at the final abstract example, you can see there the yellow highlights the so what for the results. And then in the purple, highlighting who should take note, with the author recommending that local health districts and universities consider their findings for future planning, so suggesting how to implement the findings moving forward. Next, with WHRN, we're asking for within the abstracts to identify keywords, and up to 4. So this is important as it will be used by the conference scientific committee to group the abstracts into themes in the program. So this will really help your abstract to be grouped with other relevant presentations. So to do this, try and consider what 4 words best represent your research and include those in your submission. So to summarise and add general tips, consider telling the story of your research, identify your main message, and think about what is the take-home message for your audience. If you have results, what do they say? Who needs to hear these and why? What are the implications? As much as we love to share every aspect of our research, it's really not possible. So don't try to convey the whole project, but think about those key findings. Don't be too comprehensive, but be clear and concise. As I mentioned, it is tempting to include everything, but you really don't have the word count. So just consider what is necessary. It's also good practice to avoid any jargon or abbreviations. So as you embark on writing your abstract, try to write, review, take a break, and then come back again with fresh eyes. Also, I think if you have a colleague who's unfamiliar with your research, asking them to review or proofread is another great way to check on where you might be able to make some improvements. If they're not familiar with that topic area, if you've used any jargon, they can help you identify those. Another great opportunity that WHRN is offering is abstract mentoring. So if you would be interested in gaining some extra support to submit your abstract, you can send an inquiry to the address there on the slide, admin@whrn.org.au, and then they can link you with somebody to support you through this process. I'll hand back to you, Mel.
Thanks, Shannon. So just before we finish today's workshop, I wanted to highlight what the abstract assessment criteria are that our assessment judges use for WHRN. So each of these areas is rated on a rating scale from 1 to 5 for each of these different areas. So we look at the clarity of the aim or the question. We look at the ease of reading the abstract and whether the abstract has covered all of the key elements. So that's the introduction, the method, the findings, and the conclusion. We ask our abstract judges to make a determination as to whether the research methodology is sound and rigorous and whether that relates to the research question. whether there's been a thoughtful approach to how the study was designed, and in particular thinking about the context in which the study was conducted. If applicable, so if there are results available at the time of submitting the abstract, whether those results are easily understood and whether they have been interpreted correctly, and whether the take-home messages or the implications of the research are clear. Then you can get up to an extra 5 points if the relevance to rural health is forefront in the study design and, if applicable, in the way that the results have been analysed. We also give up to 5 additional points for research that is original and creative. And finally, if you are submitting in the emerging researcher category, you will be able to gain some additional points in your abstract rating if you are based rurally, or if you are an urban-based researcher who has an interest and is doing their research in a rural area. So just before we finish up, we just wanted to add a final word on abstract authorship. So often we all work on projects with other people, with colleagues and clinicians. So please let them know that you're intending to submit an abstract to WHRN and get their permission before you submit the abstract. It's important to allow your co-authors time to review the abstract and edit the abstract before it is submitted. And to make sure that you have all of your co-authors' names and affiliations correct and at hand when you go to submit your abstract, as you'll need to put these all into a ward force at the time of abstract submission. If you have any questions or queries or want to clarify anything about submitting an abstract for the WHRN 2025 conference, please contact us via admin@whrn.org.au. Thank you.